everyone, this is Pico Entertainment and we're back again, and here now we have another video for you, and we're going to talk about James Gunn Superman for probably one of the last times on this channel. Its overall box office and comparisons to Man of Steel, and whether we now can definitively call it either a success, a failure, or indeed a big flop. Now there could be spoilers here for the movie itself, so just beware, and also likely for Man of Steel. But also you can check out both my non-spoiler and spoiler reviews of the movie within the channel, and I'll leave some links within the description. So this discussion then comes off the 6th weekend of the movie's release, where it grossed around a $5 million total within US cinemas for a total of around $340 million. Now in terms of that territory, that would be deemed to be very good or very impressive, especially given the current decline of the superhero genre, and especially when we look at what's happening right now with all of the 3 Marvel movies released this year. But as we've commented many times on this channel and has been reported, Superman hasn't done as well overseas, and that is really what has prevented it from being an all-out success in terms of both box office gross and indeed profitability. And following that performance in its 6th weekend, the movie currently now stands at a gross of around $596 million. Now, when we refer to Man of Steel, of course, that came out back in 2013 with a final tally of around $668 million. And when we covered the James Gunn Superman film all the way back from when he was first announced as the main creator of the new DC universe and also the director of this film, I said on the channel, regardless of whether the film is good or bad, critically well received, the one thing it absolutely had to do was to gross more than Man of Steel. We know this primarily because of the, for the sake of argument, we'll say the feverish passion of the Snyder fan base, who have been monitoring this movie's performance ever since it was announced. And following the disbanding of the Snyderverse from the final release of the 4-hour version of Zack Snyder's Justice League to the various movies that have followed from the likes of Birds of Prey, Blue Beetle, Black Adam and Shazam 2, with the release of Matt Reeves' The Batman, and the all but confirmed departures of the main cast from the likes of Henry Cavill, Gal Gadot, Ben Affleck and also Jason Momoa. We knew that any subsequent iteration of the DC characters cinematically would come under close scrutiny from the Snyder fan base. They of course are still holding out for any possible resurrection or regeneration of their favoured universe. And any underperformance from James Gunn's movie would be seen in their eyes as validation that the Snyderverse was still to be able to be continued. Now, whilst in theory I don't necessarily agree completely with that, we can understand that why Man of Steel's overall box office would be used as a barometer to see how successful or unsuccessful that James Gunn's new iteration would be. So regardless of whether we like the movie or not, and you've already seen from my review that I was not a fan of this film, the one thing it absolutely had to do was outgross Man of Steel, as well as convince mainstream audiences that this was a Superman that they could fully get behind going forward for any potential extension of the DC universe under James Gunn. Well, after this latest weekend's total, I think we can now almost definitively say that Superman 2025 will not be catching Man of Steel's tally at the box office, and this was very much underlined by the digital release of the movie going ahead on the 15th of August 2025. Now, as we all know, for the last 4 to 5 years, there's been an ongoing issue with all of these prolific cinematic releases going on digital release 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks after they've come out within cinemas. Very much a contrast to what we used to see back in the 80s and the 90s, and certainly the early to late 2000s, where sometimes a movie would get a run of at least 4 to 5 months on theatres, and then we wouldn't see it on any subsequent home video release for at least 6 months to a year afterwards. And I've always favoured that release strategy, as I think it gives the movie an exclusivity and also the chance to be further successful down the line if it doesn't necessarily have a big opening weekend. We would get many films from the past that what we would deem sleeper hits They would open small, perhaps coming in at only number 3 or number 4 at the box office, but if they were good enough, then word of mouth would spread, and we would see the movie then sustain itself for the next 2 to 3 months and end up becoming one of the biggest hits of the entire year. But this whole strategy of putting it on digital release only a couple of weeks, it seems, really robs any potential of a film garnering that level of success. And when we look at Superman 2025, the fact is that it's barely been out for a month, around 35 to 36 days before going on digital release. Now we know the reason for this. If the studio feels that the movie is dwindling in terms of its theatrical box office, then they will quickly shift it to digital release, where they will gain a far bigger share of the revenue that is generated from that release, as opposed to theatrically, where we know they share a certain portion with the theatres in terms of the overall gross. So for me personally, that was the real admission with this film coming out digitally, that the studio realised that it wasn't going to perform on the same level as Man of Steel. Now, if you've been following this discourse online, you would have seen many updates and comparisons and interpretations regarding the two movies' release. We've seen all sorts of arguments in terms of staggered release, the pre-Amazon early showings that James Gunn's Superman benefited from, how the films have compared in terms of certain territories, the factor in terms of ticket prices, where of course James Gunn's version had a far bigger ticket price than what we saw with 2013's Zack Snyder version, the fact that the state of the superhero genre was far prominent back in 2013 and what it is now, the whole issue of inflation and whether that's a valid argument or not. The fact remains that whether you like to throw all of those elements into play, that as of now, Man of Steel has ended up grossing more than James Gunn's version. So does this really mean anything at all? Well, I do think to an extent that it's not a good picture. The fact that this newer version has gained a lot of critical praise and good reception for most people hasn't managed to make a bigger impact than the Zack Snyder version, which was seen as very divisive amongst fans, including myself. The fact that the James Gunn version was very much a course correction, being a lot more brighter and more colourful and more lighter in its tone. As many deemed, the more dour, grim, realistic version of Zack Snyder was very anti-Superman, something which I also agree with. And yes, we could argue it's a valid question. Why is it then that this version was very much answering the complaints of what happened before, yet it has somehow grossed less? Now, for me personally, I do believe it's down to 3 major issues. The one being that the issue of the superhero decline and fatigue is very much a substantial discussion now within movies. Again, we just referred to the underperformance of the 3 Marvel entries this year. You can't deny that audiences are not being drawn to these films the same way that they were back in 2013. The second issue being that the DC brand itself has also been very damaged. As I mentioned before, the subsequent entries following the 4-hour cut of the Snyder Justice League have all financially underperformed and again damaged the DC brand as a whole. Many mainstream and general audiences would have seen this as yet another DC superhero movie. If the previous entries haven't been very good, then why should they pay any more attention to this one this time around? And the third issue, I will say that again, that I believe that James Gunn's tone and sensibility just didn't have a mass appeal on the global scale. For all of the lighter tone and comic book colour, you still never felt that this was a truly world-saving, all-encompassing, stoic, strong Superman. Something that could really capture the awe and imagination of audiences in the same way that Christopher Reeve did back in 1978. I really do feel that that was something to be considered and something that proved to be very decisive as to why the movie didn't really perform as well overseas as what it has domestically within the US. So for all of that then, whether we would deem this entry to be a success or not, I would say overall it's been a very moderate success at best. It won't be a huge profitable success for DC, but at the same time, they could at least say that it has been much more successful than the Marvel entries, which again isn't saying much. So going forward then, does this mean that James Gunn's Chapter 1 of his DC Gods and Monsters is an absolute bust? I would say no, and I'm probably saying that more from an objective point of view than a personal point of view. If you've watched my channel, you know that I've never been a true supporter of James Gunn in terms of him being the director for Superman. I've said multiple times that with certain characters, yes, his style and sensibility can be very good, as what we've seen with Guardians of the Galaxy, but there are certain characters that he should be nowhere near, and Superman is one of them. And my greatest fear has been that he is favouring much more the outsider, misfits, what he would deem characters with imposter syndrome. And we've seen that currently with the likes of Creature Commandos. We, of course, have the upcoming second season of Peacemaker. The fact that we are getting a Clayface movie without Batman, very strange. The fact that we saw the Justice Gang included in his Superman movie, and the fact that his Supergirl film that is coming out next year will be based on Tom King's Women of Tomorrow, which is very much looking at a deconstructive presentation of the character where she's broken down, very rage driven and a drunk, and especially what we saw from the appearance by Millie Alcock at the end of the Superman movie doesn't really garner me with a lot of hope. So I think what needs to happen is that for James Gunn's chapter to succeed, I think Supergirl or Clayface have to hit big. Now, normally you wouldn't expect a Supergirl movie to be as successful than Superman, but I think in this particular case, if we are to see any potential success, I think Supergirl does need to be a big hit. Anything from around 5 to 700 million would be the sweet spot. At this stage, I really can't see that happening. But once more, if James Gunn's chapter 1 of the DC universe is to see any prosperity, then he can't have Supergirl or Clayface underperform. If that does indeed tend to be the case, then of course the Snyder fan base will continue their campaigning against it, and it will also dampen enthusiasm for his future iteration of Batman. That in itself is a contentious debate when we are referencing the supposed sequel to Matt Reeves' The Batman. Whether that will see the light of day, that remains to be seen. But maybe this performance, or this very average performance of Superman, will indeed see that project going forward. And once more, that will tell us where James Gunn is going forward in terms of his iteration of the DC Cinematic Universe, and whether it will indeed be successful or not in the very future. But in terms of comparisons to Man of Steel, all of the elements and arguments that are into play, the fact is that it will indeed be the lesser successful Superman entry within the cinematic universe. So that's my overall thoughts and feelings when looking at James Gunn's Superman and where it's at, and in comparison to Man of Steel. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and if you have any other further movies, television series, or any other topics with the pop entertainment and culture scene that you'd like to see me cover within the channel, then also let me know in the comments, and I will see if I can provide further commentary for you on that subject matter within the future. Please also hit like the subscription and notification buttons so I can provide you with more high quality content like this in the future. But that's it for now. Take care of yourselves, and I will see you very, very soon.